disruptive.
America that I fought for.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. It's been a fantastic day so far. You may recall, at the height of the pandemic, right when the Freedom Convoy, the trucker protest, and that all happened, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau deliberately went on to a French talk show, ironically, to disguise himself from the horribleness they said upon Canadians, that he labeled people that partake in anti-mandate protests, not really much anti-vaccine, but more just against the authoritarianism factor that came out of COVID. He referred to them as racist, misogynistic, and throwed every trope and attack on ordinary Canadians exercising their right of protest. And you may recall that moment when he went on to this late night talk show done in French, because obviously I guess that's a tactic of theirs, is that they say the worst of the worst on French programming, hoping that ordinary Canadians that aren't exactly 100% bilingual won't pick up on it. But luckily we did, and here's just a refresher of some of the tactics that Justin Trudeau used to vilify ordinary Canadians as being the worst monsters in the nation. Watch this.
Oui, on va s'en sortir de cette pandémie.
So let me put this down and I'll read the transcript here. It says, yes, we will get this out of this pandemic by vaccination. We all know people who are a little bit, we continue to try to convince them, but there are also who are fiercely against vaccination. There are extremists. We don't believe in science. They're often misogynist, often racist. It's a small group, but they take up some space. And we have to make a choice in terms of leaders, in terms of our country. Do we tolerate these people? Or do we say almost 80% of Quebecois people got vaccinated? We want to get back to things that we love to do. It's not those people. Hold on, let me read that. It's not those people, the vaccinated, who are going to block us. So, the convincing argument of Justin Trudeau is to demonize half your population and saying you're a bunch of misogynistic, racist Neanderthals that don't know a thing about science, don't know a thing about educating yourself, and the most adult thing you should be doing right now is to line up, comply, and get jabbed. Because they're very safe and effective. That's the leader of this country. The leader of Canada is demonizing half its population. And they've done it with other countries, but this is definitely a step in the wrong direction that Canada faced during the times of this pandemic, which they lied and continuously lie, and still to this day lie, to cover up the actions of what this Prime Minister, what Chrystia Freeland, and what people in the higher up did to the rest of the population. So here's also another take that Justin Trudeau again vilified the people of Canada by saying they had unaccepting views.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
That is the makings of a dictator right there. That you have unaccepting views to be in this country, and in order to protect our freedoms as Canadians, we have to restrict freedoms from Canadians. In order to protect you, we have to vilify you. We have to turn you into the enemy. We have to turn you into the big problem. Because you're not understanding science, which they don't understand science. And the only way we will actually understand science is if we question science. We question, we examine, we do research, we listen to professionals, but then we also question them to make sure they're factually accurate. That's what analysis is for. That's why people do research. That's why they do peer reviews. That's why they do testing. This guy doesn't know jack squat about science, but he's dictating over you to say that you don't have unaccepting views because you're not following his scientific terms. The scientific terms that were directive from big pharmaceuticals by Theresa Tam, who's been a nonstop pathological liar of this nation and still to this day lying to the nation as the leader of the health of Canada. So now, fast forward to today, Justin Trudeau was on this radio show for CBC News Radio, and he was asked about his words and his language back in the height of the pandemic. That does he have any regrets about yelling and screaming and telling ordinary Canadians, peaceful acting Canadians, that they are a bunch of misogynistic, racist people with unaccepting views? Does he have any regrets of saying that? Because his poll numbers are going down and people are angrily disliking this guy. They're angered at what Justin Trudeau did to this country. He betrayed the nation of Canada. So this radio host, I think his name is Galloway, not George Galloway from the UK, who has other all talk shows, but this is another Galloway, asked Justin Trudeau if he has regrets on what he said at the time of that pandemic and vilifying half the country. Does he have any regrets considering his favorability is deteriorating and is at the lowest point of any politician?
In the 2021 campaign, you used words talking about people, framing them as anti-vaxxer mobs. You talked about their racist and misogynist agenda. Do you regret you?
Which, by the way, I just want to point out that when he views the crowd as an anti-vaccine mob, that's completely false. Because even the truckers that were getting demonized for organizing this protest was the most vaccinated occupation of any Canadian job out there. They had high vaccination rates compared to any occupation in Canada. But they were against the mandates. They were against the authoritarian measures that came afterwards. They were against the unscientifically proven theories of mandating that only vaccinated people were allowed to eat at restaurants, that we had to shut down small businesses and never see them open again, that we had this unruly security state that surveilled, track, and monitor and exposed everybody, while the government and the data of this virus was kept hidden from people. We weren't allowed to know about the vaccine. We weren't allowed to know about side effects. We weren't allowed to know about adverse side effects. We weren't allowed to know about clinical trials. We weren't allowed to know any of this for another 75 years. But they put the spotlight on us. So when they say it's an anti-vaccine mob, no. Were there some anti-vaccine skeptics there? Obviously. But the root of the protest was against the authoritarian measures that his government placed onto people.
Using language like that, though? And do you think that that has added to how people think about you?
I regret that when I was talking about specific groups of racist, intolerant protesters, not everyone in the protest, but the ones who were shouting racial epithets and misogynistic slurs at my security detail and others, I'm going to call out intolerance and hateful language wherever it has. It is unfortunate that...
Now, would that same measure apply to when, hypothetically, or, well, here's an example. When comedians are canceled out because of the LGBTQ crowd that's targeting comedians for making jokes about the subject matter. Does that apply? That you're being intolerable towards comedians that are just trying to make funny jokes? Or is that going to apply to those people? No. This is Justin Trudeau using weasel tactic words to wedge his way out of this. Well, I didn't mean for all people, but there are some people that need to have this, need to be labeled a misogynist, a racist, and xenophobic, and this and that, and blah, 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 blah. But what he's not telling you, and what we have exposed and what we have saw, because we saw actual footage of people on the ground during the protests, is that all Canadians of all walks of life, regardless of race, religion, credence, sexual orientation, no matter who you are, there was an abundance of a unified Canadian workforce gathered together in Ottawa during freezing temperatures to go against the authoritarian measures done by him. He's not going to tell you that. But he's going to tell you that out of this crowd, there were some people that I had to vilify the rest of the crowd. There's some bad actors that had to ruin it all for everybody.
What I said was able to be that made a number of people feel I was talking about them. I have always been very, very careful to know people can be make own decisions about whether they get vaccinated or not, that there's normal vaccine hesitancy out there in every population. And our job as a government is to try and encourage people to do the right things for public health.
And how did you encourage those people? Did you talk to them, educate them? Did you bring awareness of the vaccine? Did you bring some scientific inquiries on the vaccine? Did you tell people about the dangers, but also the positives and the negatives and weigh those out? No. You purposely segregated society and said, if you don't get vaccinated, you're not allowed to partake in anything outside your house. You segregated people. You vilified people. You had people in the mainstream media scream at the top of their lungs. You had people like Keith Olbermann telling his audience that they're a bunch of pathetic losers and cowards if they don't get severely jabbed multiple times. Because that's really going to encourage people, screaming at them, yelling at them, instead of just educating them and then letting them decide for themselves, which is something that I would be doing. You know, the reason I bring stories about COVID, when we talked about COVID and still talk about COVID, is to educate people. It's to educate about all the mess that went through this pandemic, the lies, the bad, the good, the ugly, everything needs to be out on the table so that people are aware of all this information, and then they can make their own decisions based on that information that I'm providing to you. They didn't do that. They vilified people. They screamed at people. They segregate people. And that's why people protested.
The fact that the polarization and the toxicity was so amplified deliberately with misinformation and disinformation is something that is a larger question than just, what I said on one particular day that was taken out of context. It's about whether Canadians are actually listening to each other and talking with each other and hearing each other and trying to remember that we are all in this together as citizens.
Wow. Well, it's not about what I said on that particular day. It's about, making sure that Canadians, comply with each other. They're talking to each other. They don't mean like talking as in like when the protests happening, all walks of Canadians gathered together, talked to each other, talked about their, hardship during this pandemic. No. We got to make sure that everyone's complying on the same line. That's what he means by that. We got to make sure there's compliance. We don't want actual unity. We don't want people gathering together and actually fighting against the true evils of the world. No. We want just compliance. We want everyone to just shut up and do what they're told. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm Justin Trudeau, and I approve that message on that particular day. Other days, I just don't want to. I don't want to mention about. But on that day, I approve that message. God. And here's also him. This is last year. This is towards New Year's Eve, I believe, when they do the year-end review, and was interviewed by CTV News, and he was also asked about what he said during the pandemic. Does he regret using the Emergencies Powers Act that restricted Canadians of their basic rights and freedoms, like using their own bank accounts? Does he have any regrets on the fact that he went authoritarian to the max to demonize and vilify ordinary Canadians that were simply speaking out against the ridiculous mandates that were proven unscientific? And they deliberately lied to you every point in turn. Everything. They lied to you about masks, about herd immunity. They didn't tell you about natural immunity. They didn't tell you about vitamins. They didn't tell you about making sure that your immune system was powerful. They didn't tell you any of this. And anyone that did tell you about this was vilified, put a target on their back, and squashed by the rest of the establishment. They had their goons after people. So Justin Trudeau was asked, do you regret any of this during this interview? And this was tweeted out by Special Rebel Rapporteur Andy Lee. She says, Justin Trudeau says in a year-end review interview with CTV's Omar Sachedina that he does not regret his comments regarding truckers and demonstrators, people who are tinfoil hats wearers. That's what he's calling truckers, who at the start of the pandemic, Justin Trudeau acknowledged as heroic. That's the mangled mess that this guy is. He endorsed truckers at the start of this pandemic for making sure that food still goes on grocery shelves, making sure that they're traveling around, that while the world was locked down, they were the first responders. They were the essential workers. And now he's vilifying the essential workers. So here's what he said about that.
I think in all my communications, in the frustration that Canadians were feeling, not just around that, but around the pandemic in general, there was a sense that Canadians really stepped up for each other. People went out and got vaccinated to a higher degree than just about any other country. And because of that, we actually had a better and safer pandemic than most people. Yes, we lost far too many people and it was heartbreaking, but we did better than most of the other countries that we can compare to. The fact that there were some people out there who were actively spreading.
Now, can that be said about now in the rise of apparent adverse side effects that we've been covering on this channel? Or the rise of sudden adult death syndrome? That's actually a thing now. They coined the term SADS because of how much of an increase it has become on not just Canada, but as a society as a whole. That there's more far excessive deaths in just the most recent years than most people have seen in all of humanity. And he's saying we had a safe pandemic. Try trying to convince people that we had a safe, healthy pandemic when they lost their business, where people were evicted from their houses, where people ended up homeless, where food banks were lined up for miles long, where they vilified people and yelled at people and propagandized people to segregate this nation. Try convincing those people that we had a safe and healthy pandemic. And we're still gripping with the aftermath of this. That nobody is ever going to be held accounted for.
Harmful, disinformation and misinformation, harmful lies that made people scared that the vaccine was more dangerous than the virus, and families sitting around the bedside of a loved one who was dying from COVID saying, oh my God, I wish he'd just taken the vaccine. I wish he hadn't listened to all those YouTube channels. Like, this is real. They were real.
At least with the YouTube channels, like myself and other people, we actually provide data. How many government PSAs did we see during the pandemic, or health PSAs, or experts going on television that just told you get the vaccine? Did they provide evidence? Did they provide any medical analysis to it? Did they provide any article? No. They just told you to do it. Do as I say. Do as I say, not as I do. But for us, we showed the data. We're showing analysis. We're showing what professionals are talking about. We're showing what doctors are saying, what's been tested, what hasn't been tested, what really it was behind that lie, who's saying what's being backed, what Big Pharma is really doing to people. We're at least providing information. And again, we're not doing it to scare people. We're doing it to inform people so that they're aware of this information, and then they can make their own decisions based on themselves, which is what bodily autonomy is, which is what this guy who says he's for isn't in this regard, because he's a stooge for Big Pharma. He's a big stooge for the global conspiracy that is COVID-19. And not the whole thing is just an absolute insane. And it's absolutely insane that none of these people will be ever held accountable. Nobody is ever going to be held accountable or pay a price or any charge or receive any jail sentence for the amount of damage that they have done to these people. Justin Trudeau says he doesn't even have regrets.
Real tragedies, and there were people trying to gin that up and to expand the divisions and the fear and sense of conspiracy that were out there. We had, as a government, always and will always be extremely patient with people who are hesitant about getting a vaccine or whatever. But those people who were actively putting people's lives in danger by spreading falsehoods around science that will help and heal and save people and save our economy and save lives and save our institutions, those people, and they were a small minority within the larger anti-movements who were really vocal. I don't and I won't apologize for calling out people who were harming their fellow Canadians.
So tinfoil hats comment you don't regret?
Well, when someone believes that your government is trying to inject a vaccine in you to control your mind and track you, and there's a microchip in it, that's almost the definition of a government conspiracy theory, that you wear a tinfoil hat to protect your brain from brainwaves.
But that's not all you went after, Justin Trudeau. He's doing this in a way that, like, what YouTube would do when it came to Adpocalypse. We're targeting specific channels, specific people. We're only doing it for this slim minority of people. But what they actually did was use that as a method to expand their horizons and go after individuals who did not say that the vaccine had microchips in them, but did say that COVID, the surveillance measures that they put in place in part of this pandemic, is dangerous. That's something that I addressed. I've also addressed that the vaccine, if it's so safe and effective, where exactly is the data that's showing how effective it is, and why was the effective rate declining over just a short period of time? That's stuff we were saying throughout the pandemic and still continue to address. Because the more information you have on the subject matter, the more informed and then you can make the final decision based on yourself, based as a patient, on what direction you want to go with your health. That's the most scientific method you can be doing, is discussing it like grown-ups and having questions, having curiosities, having skepticism. There's always that case when it comes to science. That's how science evolves. That's how innovation evolves. That's how everything evolves, from skepticism, from questioning, from conversation, from debates, discussion. And what he's telling you is to shut up. I don't regret ever telling people that they're tinfoil hat maniacs, and you just have to comply. That's what Justin Trudeau is saying here. And he's just using that tiny minority, specific targets, as a front to widen the horizon, to move the goalpost, to go after that majority of people. Because he went after many Canadians during that pandemic. He went after the people that were sending GoFundMe, that weren't even partake of the protests, but were sending GoFundMe donations to the truckers. He vilified them. That's how dangerous this man is. And the fact that he has no regrets of any of that is insanely evil. This is a narcissistic, evil dictator wannabe that is commanding the ship and turning this country into an absolute hellhole, and is vilifying, segregating, and destroying the society of Canada. And it's just going to get worse if we don't hold accountable to the wrongdoings that this administration has done to the country. Not just in regards to COVID, but everything. Because I know for a fact Omar Sachedina sitting there and just nodding his head isn't going to hold him accountable. They're not going to hold him accountable. No mainstream publication or broadcast is going to hold this guy accountable. And why would they? Because they're getting good benefits off of him. That's where it leads to podcasters. That's where it leads to dangerous figures that have web cameras that are shooting on a shoestring budget, that have to inform you about important measures when it comes to policy, when it comes to health, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to the environment. We, unfortunately, have to be the watchdogs. Because this is what happens in a falling empire that's collapsing with the buffoon as the mascot, dragging the nation down to its knees. It's just an absolute disgrace.